Hello, and thank you for tuning in. Throughout April, which is Black Women's History Month, a coined term by my friend, wrestling aficionado Daryl Dr. D. Johnson, I'm posting content celebrating the Black women trailblazers who made history as world-famous wrestlers in the 1950s and 60s. I made a documentary about these courageous women called Lady Wrestler, and it's available to watch on Amazon Prime Video. In this interview, I'm featuring an interview with wrestling star Roni Nicole, who is carrying on the legacy of the Black women trailblazers. This interview was originally featured on the podcast Lady Wrestler, the story behind the story, which features bonus content from the documentary. You can check out the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and several other platforms. I'll put a link to the podcast and to the documentary itself in the description of this video. And now, here's my interview with the awesome, the one and only Roni Nicole.
Are you pitting women as main event because you see the value and you understand that we are equal, or are you doing it because you know there's money there? I mean, either way, yay, I'm glad women are getting a shot, but if it's going to change, and if it's going to be real and long-lasting change, it has to come from a place of genuine want, of genuine acceptance, of equality, of equity.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Lady Wrestler, the story behind the story. This podcast expounds on issues explored in the documentary Lady Wrestler, the amazing untold story of African American women in the ring. I'm Chris Bournet, and I directed the documentary. Lady Wrestler delves into a lost chapter of American history and chronicles how courageous African American women like Babs Wingo, Ethel Johnson, Marva Scott, Ramona Isbell, and Kathleen Wembley integrated professional wrestling in the 1950s and 60s. So, here's a question. How do we bring about true, lasting equity for women in the wrestling industry, especially women of color? Here to give her perspective is someone who is doing amazing work in this space, wrestling superstar Roni Nicole. Before becoming a professional wrestler, Roni Nicole worked as a model, cheerleader, dance color guard instructor, and starred in numerous independent films and theatrical productions, such as For Colored Girls, according to ProWrestlingFandom.com. Upon joining the wrestling industry, she trained under the tutelage of the Enforcer C.W. Anderson, Lou Marconi, and Chilly Willie. Her nicknames include the Southern Belle from Hell and the She-Hulk of the South. Roni Nicole's signature moves include Nicole on the Rocks, Diving Leg Drop, and Booty Bye Bye. Her championships include the Gouge Women's Championship and the Resistance Pro Wrestling Championship. In this exclusive interview, Roni Nicole weighs in not only on the status of women in the wrestling industry, but also shares about her blended family and how she learned to embrace both the African American and Afro-Latino sides of her heritage. Without further ado, here's Roni Nicole. So Roni, thank you again for taking the time to do this. This is an episode of the Lady Wrestler podcast about kind of the future of women's wrestling, and kind of you represent the future of women's wrestling and the Black women especially who are following in the footsteps of the women in the documentary, like Ethel Johnson and her sister Babs and her sister Marva. So I was reading up on you, as I said, and I understand that you're, in addition to being a wrestler, you've been a dancer and an actress and a performer. And you're a Houston native, right? But you live in Raleigh, North Carolina now, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So tell me about a little bit about yourself and your upbringing, and what was the path for you to get into wrestling?
Well, I usually tell people there isn't one path to be a professional wrestler. You're taught when you're training that if you work hard and you make all the right steps, that you'll make it to the show, which at that time was WWE. Now we know there are a lot of different shows, so the methodology has changed a bit. But I honestly fell into wrestling. I was a secret fan for a long time. I'm from a very conservative Southern Baptist Black Christian family. So wrestling was nowhere near the zeitgeist of what my family was about. And I just happened to fall into seeing it. I did have cousins and family members who scholastically wrestled, but because of the schools that I went to, there was no wrestling for females and they would not do anything that was co-ed. So I never had the academic opportunity to get into it, even though I had interest. And so at the time, I was actually semi-professional cheerleading and I was looking for a different team to cheer for. And I just happened upon a Craigslist ad that was looking for athletic females. I assumed at the time that it was for professional cheerleading, but it turned out to be for professional wrestling, and which was awesome and serendipitous because from then on, I had my foot in the door and away I went. So I kind of stumbled into it by happenstance. And I would say that my whole career has been a lot of stumbling and kind of finding my way. But it's definitely something that I always feel I was called to be a part of. And everything in my life, from the acting, modeling, singing, pageants, cheerleading, dance, color guard, winter guard, karate, jujitsu, all of that has played a part into professional wrestling in one way or another, and has really prepared me in an entertainment sense to be able to do some things a little easier, just because I've had that experience in front of a camera and in front of people and performing pretty much my whole life. So I do feel fortunate to have had all of these things that I did before wrestling, which almost led me, very successfully to wrestling. But once I got in, it's a different story, just like the women that you spoke about in the documentary. Like, it's very different, especially for a Black woman, especially for an Afro-Latina in the South. So it's definitely something, as the new generation of women in this business, that as we move forward, I want to prepare other wrestlers and the younger wrestlers for that journey in maybe a better and more holistic way than, myself and my other colleagues were prepared. I hope that wasn't too much and I answered your question.
Not at all. Not at all. It's fascinating. I'm actually learning to speak Spanish. It's just something I've always wanted to do.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm really interested in people like yourself who sort of bridges between cultures, bridges between the Latin community and the African American community. Can you talk a little bit about that? What was your experience like growing up?
Truthfully, my experience was very fragmented. My parents actually got divorced when I was 6 years old. But my mom still wanted me to have a relationship with my grandmother and my aunts and my uncles on that side. And so often in the summer, I would go and visit my grandmother, who lived in Jamaica, Queens, and was from Colon, Panama. And so she was everything about a Hispanic woman that you can imagine. Like, everything was just so bright and vibrant. And I just remember her house always smelled so good and everything was very family oriented and everyone knew everything about you. And it was a very, not intrusive in a bad way, but our hands are on you because we love you environment. And so that was really different from my super conservative Black Southern family here in the Carolinas, it was more of a love you from afar approach, if that makes any sense. And so it was kind of like culture shock almost for me every time I would go visit them, because I'm also the only female out of every single one of my cousins on that side of the family. So I am very looked after by the males on that side of my family, which, much to their chagrin, is annoying because I'm not that type of woman. So it is a very melting pot environment. And for me, I don't see it very different. The only way I know it's different is when I talk to my friends who don't have blended families. But for me, growing up and hearing like Latin music and reggaeton, that was normal. Like eating Hispanic food, eating ropa vieja, like that was normal when I would go to my grandma's house. You know what I mean? So it was just like, this is what happens at grandma's, but when I go home, this is a little bit different. But in terms of my career, I do feel more embraced by that side of my family in terms of that, because of that connection to wrestling through Hispanic culture and luchadors. My family was already very familiar with that. So for them, it on that side, it wasn't a big jump. But for my family on the other side, it was kind of like, you're coming out of left field with this. What are you talking about? So it's really something that I have learned to blend, and that when I have my own family one day, I'm hoping that they'll get that sense of how all of us are melded together. Even though our cultures are distinct, there's so many things we share in common that, it's a beautiful blend that makes something very tantalizing at the end. So I would say that now I'm noticing differences as I get older. When I was younger, it was just kind of like, oh, this is what happens at grandma's, or, oh, I can't talk to this guy because one of my cousins is going to want to talk to him. Like, it was a very, that was just kind of how it was. So for me, I really didn't see much of a difference. Like I said, unless it was, if I was talking to my friends and they were like, oh, my family doesn't do that. And I was like, oh, okay. But a lot of my friends are also blended as I've gotten older. So I have a lot of friends who are Ghanaian, or they are from Trinidad, or, their parents are from West Africa, or their parents are from Jamaica, so they have that same sense of two cultures merging into your identity as Black. And so it's fun. I would say it's fun. It's interesting. It gives me personally a very colorful personality and perspective of life, and ways to look at things as well, I think.
Yeah, I actually come from a blended family as well. I have three white step parents and four biracial siblings. So, I know there are like blended families, especially with the white and Black thing, with how binary America is. Like, you're either white or you're Black, or you either fit in with the Black community or whatever. But I mean, I didn't know that we were any different. So it never occurred to me like, oh, we're weird, or, because it was just like, that was my family growing up, and didn't know any different.
Yeah. And I mean, I was always taught by my mother's side and by my father's side. I don't have a relationship with my father, but I had a relationship with his mother and my aunts. And before my grandmother on my father's side passed, she always imparted to me the importance of standing up and being proud of who you were. It doesn't matter where you're from. Just be proud of who you are, because God gave you life, and you should be proud of the life that you were given, and you need to do something with it and help people along the way. And my mom told me the same thing. So it wasn't in terms of ideals and growing up, it was always the kind of the same messaging. So I didn't really see differences until I got older. And I was like, okay, so my grandma, when her friends would come over, they would actually, have a glass of wine or have a drink or whatever. Whereas my other side of the family is the dry family. Those are the differences that I noticed versus, something big culturally speaking, because we all did a lot of the same thing. The kitchen is where you gather and talk and eat. Grandma doesn't want you in there until it's time to come in there. You pray before you eat. You let the elders eat, or you fix their plate before you eat. You make sure that, everyone is taken care of. Everybody cleans up afterwards. That type of stuff is kind of not necessarily, to me, Black or Hispanic or Asian. That's just like a thing that you do in the brown community, period. And so I didn't really feel that growing up I had anything different or lacking, because I was like, we're all doing the same things, just with a little spice on some sides.
Right, right. Have you ever visited or wrestled in Panama? I mean, I
I
know with the
haven't wrestled.
pandemic, it's hard right now, but
Well, yeah, pandemic has really shut down a lot of travel. I'm glad to see it's opening back up. But I've never
yes.
wrestled in Panama, no, but I did visit Cologne when I was young. Um, my family there has interesting ties, and there are some people there that aren't really on board with some of the things that the male side of my family was engaged in. That's as far as I'd like to go with that. But
Sure, sure.
so it was a very interesting experience every time I went, because here in the States, you're not known. I mean, in your communities or your neighborhoods, growing up, if I got in trouble, yeah, it was known. Like, I was gonna all the way walking to my grandma's house, somebody was gonna say something to me about what I did at school. Like, that was one thing. But when you literally go into a foreign country and people spit at you because of what your family has done, but you necessarily weren't connected to that, that's like a that's a totally different thing, and I honestly wasn't prepared for that at 11, 12 years of age. So I can say that I hope when I return things are a little bit different. But yeah, it's a beautiful country. I love Panama. I would love to live there, but it definitely is something that took some getting used to, and definitely something that as I'm older I'm more aware of. in terms of safety and what's going to be best for me travel wise, if that makes any sense. So
Absolutely. So, how did both sides of your family react? I know you said your father's side of the family was a little more, seemed like you kind of implied they were a little more open minded when you started wrestling.
yes,
How did they react?
I had a show in Brooklyn. I want to say it was maybe about 3 years after I started wrestling. And like my aunts came, my cousins came, like they were all excited in the back and cheering and stuff. My father does not agree with wrestling. He's had a lot of colorful language to say about me in terms of my wrestling career. But in terms of his siblings, my aunts and uncles and my grandmother, like they are very supportive. They think it's awesome. Because that side of my family is very passionate and outspoken, and they're all from New York. So, the attitude there is very different. They saw the connection and instantly understood like why I love the ring. Whereas my family here on my mother's side is, as I said, they're very conservative, and I would say they're very aware of keeping up with the Joneses.
Sure.
So my mom herself was not like that, which was already a point of contention with her family. But I think the idea of me wrestling, because wrestling has often been looked at as maybe a trashy sport or low class, so to speak, that was the perception that they carried with them. And it was something that I honestly I worked to a point to explain, but after a certain point, I no longer explained. I've been doing this for almost 10 years. So at a certain point, you're either going to get it or you're not, because I'm still doing it. So I love them from afar, but there's only so much that I'm willing to give in terms of wrestling, because like I said, as a Black woman, I've had to sacrifice a lot for the business and in service of the people in wrestling. I always like to make that distinction. Wrestling itself isn't the problem. It's the individuals in wrestling that are a problem. Wrestling itself is a beautiful art that is literally an oral tradition that we keep carrying with us throughout time. That's amazing. And there are very few other sports of the arts, if you will, that do that. But in terms of the people, yeah, it can be because people are going to people. So I definitely think a lot of their concern and a lot of what they were feeling is that perception of what wrestling used to be. Carny, under the table, a lot of bad things happening. You get used up, they spit you out, and yeah, that's still happening. That's not just exclusive to wrestling, though. That's any industry and entertainment if you let it. So I will say that now they are understanding because of time. But there was a point, Chris, where I was just like, this is what I'm doing. You either love it or you don't. I spent 4 years living and training in Japan because I'm good enough to be there, and they saw the value in me being there. So whether or not my family agrees with that, I can't wait for that. You know what I mean? Things move in the direction that they're supposed to go. And if I wasn't supposed to be wrestling, I wouldn't. So love you guys. Like that's just we're kind of at this impasse, and now that my mom has passed, like she was the last one to kind of come around to see that I really was dedicated to this, and she really changed her mindset on it and was like, well, if you're going to do it, then do it well and find a way to improve it so that it's better than when you got in, and the perception is better than what people have right now. So that's honestly been my crusade, to try to represent wrestling in the best way possible, but to also make those changes and to get into the hearts and minds of people within the business so that they understand that you don't have to do it the old way. We don't have to take advantage of people or abuse people or use people in order to meet a specific end. We can all wrestle with dignity, carry on this art with dignity, and make money at the same time. There's one of those things doesn't have to be mutually exclusive to the other. So that is really my passion within this business, is creating change and leaving it better, especially for Black and Brown and the queer community, because it's not easy at all.
Speaking of which, was there, starting out, was there someone that you looked to as a role model, or someone, I'm sure it's hard as a Afro Latina and a Black woman finding an image to kind of pattern yourself after, or someone who's like, okay, they made it, I can do it. Was there anyone that you kind of looked to as someone, okay, they broke the mold, now it's my turn, or I'm following in your.
The Kongs for sure. Amazing, and Aja. Because they don't look like your typical female wrestler. Even the older lady wrestlers are petite and beautiful, you know? And so as a bigger, curvy woman, seeing these women dominate and go in there and just, you know, give their all and be agile and engaging and entertaining and powerful and beautiful and scary and sexy all at the same time, like all of that was what I exactly wanted to exemplify. And so those women, that's why I wanted to go to Japan, because I knew that they would be, you're respected as an athlete, and racially it's a better place for bigger Black women, just keeping it honest, because they love to see that there. And so here you are in competition, but the competition is 360, because you're not only competing with other women, you're competing with the boys, you're competing with fitness models, you're competing with, you know, athletic models, you're competing with people who are not even within the realm of wrestling, because that's what's getting pulled in for some of the major products. And so for me, when I saw these women who were just all of these really wonderful, empowering, strong things, but at the same time you could still tell that they were women and they held themselves in such a way with regard and with honor, that I would just, that was who I wanted to be like. You know, that was when Roni Nicole was crafted, that was the mold that I was trying to follow. But you know, you can't be what already was. So along the way, I had to figure out who I was as an entertainer, as an athlete, and what I personally wanted to represent to people coming up behind me, because the things that Kong and Aja Kong represented to me were different because of the time period. And so I wanted to make sure that whoever I was going to be able to be translated and understood, to be received in a way that everybody could see themselves within me and could understand that it is really just a matter of believe it and achieve it, because no one else is going to do it for you and no one's going to believe in you the way you believe in yourself. So you've got to really take hold to what that dream is and use that as kind of your little sterno fuel when those, you know, when your light gets dim. But those women, I saw Aja Kong wrestle Manami Toyota on a grainy VHS tape. It was like one of their 1991 matches from All Japan, and she beat the brakes off. And Toyota got up and gave it right back to her. And I was like, what am I watching? Because this was during the Attitude Era also. So, you know, pre-Attitude Era, but things in wrestling, it was still in that area of, you know, TNA and pillow fights and jello and tiny outfits and women being used more as a gimmick or, you know, a placeholder and not as these powerful forces of nature. I mean, you had China, but I couldn't identify 100% with China because she's a giant white woman. Her life and my life are two different things. And, you know, our experiences, though we're both women, are going to be vastly different. So I couldn't really look to her. You know, I couldn't look to Tori Wilson or Kelly Kelly. I couldn't look to Lita or Trish Stratus because they don't look like me. They don't represent me. And they are white women. And full stop, our experience is different. I can get rejected off the grip just because I'm Black. Whereas a white wrestler will have the opportunity to at least have a discourse before they're rejected. So those women were the ones that I really glommed onto and really wanted to be the next of, if you will.
Did you kind of piggybacking off of that, do you think the industry has made progress in, you know, not promoting women as, like you said, just the placeholder or just the flash? And I actually interviewed Roddy Piper before he passed away, and he said the exact same thing you said, that they don't look at women as the main event. They're looked at as, you know, kind of the window dressing. Do you feel like that's changing, or do you think there's still, I mean, obviously there's still a lot of progress to be made, but I'm just curious what you think.
I think it's changing for certain women. So yes, we have women main eventing now, but look at who's main eventing. I don't know. It's very hard to gauge that, honestly, because That for me comes with intent, and that's something we as the viewers can never know. You know, are you putting women as main event because you see the value and you understand that we are equal, or are you doing it because you know there's money there? I mean, either way, yay, I'm glad women are getting a shot. But if it's going to change and if it's going to be real and long lasting change, it has to come from a place of genuine want, of genuine acceptance, of equality, of equity. And that's still not happening. WWE is still paying their male superstars more than their female superstars. So what are we doing? I mean, there are certain programs that have just started that have 25 women on their roster, but you only see the same 4 or 5 on their dark program. But they were really happy to tout out certain women at the beginning. It's something that's going to be continuous, I feel, because wrestling is a reflection of the world, and the world still views women differently. So there's only so much change that's going to come within the art, because we still are working with the mindset of people in a larger schematic. I'm optimistic as hell because, oh, sorry, I don't know if I can say that, but
Oh, absolutely. Say whatever you want. Absolutely.
I'm very optimistic that the path we're on is going to continue. But I do think that people just fumble the ball on women continuously because they're too busy trying to make women be something instead of allowing them to go perform and tell a story as they are, as who they are, without tweaks by writers who are not wrestlers or entertainers, without input from males who genuinely know the business but don't understand how the female aspect of the business works. There's a lot that needs to be, in my opinion, reshuffled in terms of understanding. And I do think that everyone in wrestling needs to understand and go through some sort of training to book, interact, and understand how to deal with the opposite sex, men and women, just because we can't continue to do what we did back in the territory days because it's 2021. So that's not going to work. So we have to evolve the booking styles. We have to evolve what it means to have a diverse roster, because there are still companies thinking that their 3 token blacks and counts as diversity to their 87 whites. So, I mean, it's a work in progress. And I'm going to remain optimistic that people are going to keep doing the work, especially with the younger wrestlers standing up and being very vocal about that. You know, that we don't see ourselves. We don't see representation. You can't just book gay people in June. We're not your Pride Month bookies. You need to have someone from every marginalized community, if available, on your card all the time, because that is what the world looks like. That is what the world is. And we should be a representation of that. And I also think there are people still steeped in that old world view of it doesn't sell, you know? I mean, look at how people talked about Black Panther before it came out. Nobody thought that movie was going to do as well as it did. And now you've got little white kids running around talking about Wakanda Forever because it does sell, because Black stories are just as significant and important in our world as white stories. So I do think that there is a lot to be done, but I also see the improvements, especially from when I started, because when I started in the 2010s, early 2010, there was none. I was the only female at my training school. I was the only female for miles around, and it literally was 2 years before any other females came onto the scene. So I wrestled dudes for most of that whole time, unless I traveled out of state and went somewhere else where they had women available. But it was not the way it is now, where you can throw a rock and you'll see a new female wrestler. Like that influx shows that women are gravitating back towards the business because they see their role, they see themselves, and they know that they're able to do that. And I will say that because of the things that have happened with WWE and major companies putting women in more prominent positions, that has led to a trickle-down effect of this influx that we're seeing now. So yes, I do think that it's creating change. Is it the change we need? Absolutely. Is there still more work to be done? Even more so, yes, because we can't be rest on our laurels and think it's going to be done at this point. You know, there's still a lot of places that only have one female match on the card, but there are plenty of female wrestlers around. You know, I think people need to change their view and really poll the people and audience and what they want to see. And people want to see women wrestling. They do. They want to see intergender. They want to see all of these things because they are available. They've been done well in the past, and there is nothing wrong with recreating that if it's done well in the future. So I think we've got a ways to go, but I'm optimistic that that's going to continue to grow and change and expand as time moves forward.
And that's a great point you made about the role the consumers play, that they want to see women wrestling. Because one thing I've noticed is that wrestling is one of the few sports where men really appreciate women athletes, you know, regardless of their gender. Every male wrestling fan I've spoken to doesn't start out by saying, "Oh, she's good for a girl." I mean,
Right.
there is a demand. There's a demand among male wrestling fans. There's a demand among fans, period. So do you feel like it's going to take the fans, you know, supporting the women's matches, and or what can fans do to help move things along?
I do think that it is a grassroots effort by fans because promoters and bookers are so concerned with what's going to make money. If fans are saying, hey, I will pay to see this, I want to see this at my home company or my local independent company, I would like to see, you know, a triple threat with these three women. I do think if the fans are more vocal about what they want, then the promoters and the bookers won't have an option because they're hearing and seeing on social media and seeing how these movements are taking off and really bolstering the women that need that little push to be brought into certain companies, because some companies do that. You know, they want to see where your social media presence is. They want to see if you're in demand before they bring you in. And if fans are wanting to see that, they're wanting more women, I do think I encourage them, you know, to be vocal about it. We all have a voice on social media these days. Tag your favorite wrestlers, tag your favorite promotions, let them know what you want, because regardless of what people think, we would not be in existence if it wasn't for the fans. We can just go and jump around in a ring and record it, but it's nothing like being in front of an audience, being in front of the fans, interacting with them, having them interact with us. That is a very special relationship. And if we don't listen to them, then we're missing a big opportunity to grow and expand what we can offer them, I think.
What's your training regimen like? And is your regimen different when when you're not, when you don't have a match coming up immediately, than it is when you are training for a specific match?
Here in the States, I train a lot differently than in Japan. In Japan, I did have that regiment of preparing for matches because it was literally a preparedness issue. The training, the matches, the regiments, everything over there is much more intense than it is here. So here it's more of I'm in the ring about once a week, so 4 times a month, and then I'm in the gym 3 or 4 times a week. If I'm preparing for something, I'll probably hit training 3 times a week and lessen my gym time. But here it's more because I work in old school style and I work Japanese style. My skill set and my move set is more dependent on the story, not necessarily dependent on a bunch of rapid fire movements. So as long as my body is in condition and it's, you know, flexible and stretched out enough to do all the crazy stuff I do in the ring, then I don't necessarily have to go as hard. Now, when COVID hit, I definitely had a lot to catch back up on because there was no ring contact, there was no training, there was no gym, there was nothing. So yes, of course, you've got to build back up. But fortunately, you know, doing stuff at home kind of kept me okay. But it's nowhere near the training measurement that I have when I'm abroad, when I'm in China, when I'm in Japan, when I'm in the Philippines. It's nothing like here because that is a lot more high level intense training just because of where I am. But here I find that it's not necessarily laxer training, but I'm really doing more in terms of ring awareness, making sure that I'm able to recover transitional things, because since I'm usually the older wrestler in the matches here, I'm the one who's more responsible for the flow. So my goal usually with training when I'm here stateside is making sure that all of those little nuanced things that help you to control a match, keep things on track, and keep people safe are at a high level. Whereas if I'm abroad, it's everything all the time has to be at a high level in terms of body conditioning, because I'm usually not the oldest person in a match. When I'm wrestling abroad, 9 times out of 10, I'm the co-high or the younger wrestler. So my job is just to show up and listen and, get in there and do things of my skill level. But here it's kind of flipped. So I do have a little bit more responsibility, and I do have to make sure that things are moving well for me so that I can protect my opponent and, clue in the referee and kind of be the ring general, so to speak, in my matches. Please make sure you're following all of my pages, Roni Nicole /Big Bang Nicole. Find me on Twitter @Glitterlicious, Instagram @GlitterLiciousBangBang. I don't have TikTok, but you can follow me on Snapchat @Roni Nicole R. And if for any booking appearances or speaking engagements, you can email me at RoniNicoleR@gmail.com.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor to speak with you.
Oh, thank you. This was wonderful.
If you like this video, please leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to my channel.